Hey everyone, Joey from One Way to Make here. And like a lot of beginner woodworkers, I've got this small job site table saw. Now saws like this work great and are really affordable, but because of their emphasis on portability, they're too small to make some of the cuts that I need. So today, I'm making a portable Outfeed table that I can set up next to my saw wherever I'm using it, and extend the size of accurate and safe cuts that I can make. And the first and most important step here is to get a good accurate measurement of your saw. So let's send it over to long-haired Joey and see how we made this Outfeed table. The important measurement here is the height. And I want my Outfeed table to be the same height as my table saw so that I can set it on whatever bench I'm working on and know that they'll be at the same height. I've also decided to make this table set just below my saw, about a 1/16 of an inch. I do this so that if the material sags as it comes off the saw, it won't clip the edge of the table. The height of my saw is 12 5/8 inches, but each saw varies, so make sure to measure your own when making this. Once I know the height I want my Outfeed table to be, I cut 2 3/4 inch pieces of plywood that will become my legs. This table will have 2 layers of 3/4 inch material for its top, so I'm cutting these legs 1.5 inches shorter than the total height that I want. After your legs are cut to height, you can cut them to length, and this measurement is arbitrary. Just make sure that it's large enough to support your material, but small enough that it's not a pain to move around. I went with the same length as my table saw, which is 18 inches. Once my legs are cut, we can move on to the first layer of the top by cutting down some 3/4 inch plywood. I first cut it to the same length as my legs, then choose the width of my table. And to choose this width, I use the same criteria that I did to pick my length. Long enough that it will be useful, but short enough that I want to use it. And I went with 28 inches. Now 28 inches is too wide for my table saw to handle, so I'm using a circular saw and a homemade track to make sure that I get a nice straight cut. If you like this track and would like to make one yourself, we've got a video showing you how. Just check out the link below. After the plywood is cut to length, I grab a 3/4 inch sheet of melamine and cut it to the same size as I did my plywood. And wait, what's this? The One Way to Make track saw works on melamine too? Now that's fancy. Maybe you should reconsider watching that video. Or maybe consider giving this video a like. Maybe subscribe to the channel. Maybe head over to onewaytomake.com and get your own stickers so you can make your jigs as fancy as this one. Maybe. Once my melamine is cut to the same size as my plywood, I stack all my pieces on top of each other to make sure that my height is right before moving on. I ran a scrap piece over my table saw and onto my Outfeed table to make sure that there were no points in which it caught an edge. Now at this point, with everything looking good, I could move on to attaching these pieces together, but I want to add a little more functionality to this Outfeed table. I'm going to do this by adding a couple of tracks so that I can continue to use my crosscut sled to work with even bigger pieces. To make these tracks, I extend my fence so that the center of my melamine is somewhere close to the center of the blade. Once I'm happy with this placement, I mark where my table saw's tracks touch the melamine on each side, connect those marks with a straight piece of wood, then fill these in with a marker so I don't get confused later. After marking the melamine, I flip it over so that the marked side is face down on the saw, and make sure that the side that was against my fence is still touching it. I then grab the plywood I cut earlier, set it on top of the melamine, and transfer my lines to the plywood. These markings on the plywood will help me know where not to add screws in my next step. Normally I would glue these 2 sheets together, but wood glue won't work on non-porous materials like melamine, so instead I'll be using 1.25 inch screws to connect the sheets. I added about 9 screws to each of my 3 sections and made sure to keep these at least 1 inch from my markings and 2 inches from the edge of the plywood. Once secure, I move my fence and panel over until the outside of my mark is touching the edge of my blade. Then lock in my fence, remove my panel, and set the height of my saw's blade to just over 3/4 of an inch. Now I can run my panel through the saw, cutting one side of my melamine, but leaving the plywood intact. I move my fence to the next mark, cut again, and this should let my piece slide right out. Once this first track is made and working well, I can move on to my second and repeat this process. And after both are finished, I can test the fit by setting my crosscut sled into the tracks and seeing if everything slides easily. Luckily, everything is sliding well for me, but if you notice any sticking points, it's not a problem. Just mark the sides that are sticking and run the panel through your saw again, just taking about 1/16 of an inch or so off at a time until things start moving smoothly. I'm just about ready to get everything attached, but I want to make sure that my legs are going to be sturdy enough. So I decided to add a 2.5 inch strip of 3/4 inch plywood to the tops of my legs where they're going to meet the tabletop. This will double my surface area and give me a stronger glue bond, and I'm just attaching these with some wood glue and a few screws I had left over from the top. I also decided to give this table some feet, in case the bench that I'm working on isn't totally flat. Now I can't add to the total height of this table, so instead I mark a shape using some scrap plywood and a bottle cap, and cut the recess I made out using my jigsaw. Now as you can see, I'm terrible at cutting straight lines with my jigsaw, but that's okay. This table's for utility, so even though it doesn't look quite as pretty as I want it to, it will get the job done just fine. Now I can finally attach my legs to the top of my table. But when I set the legs in place, I noticed a couple of problems. I don't really have a good way to clamp these legs in place or add screws to them. And this is a butt joint, which isn't the strongest joint, so I really want a good glue up here. So in the moment, I decided to flip the legs so that the support piece was facing out instead of in like I had planned. This solves a couple of problems. 1, now I have a solid edge that I can clamp to. 2, I can also screw through this ledge and into the top of my table. And 3, it will give me a nice edge to grab onto and move the table around once it's complete. It doesn't look quite as clean, but I can live with that. Once glued and clamped, I flipped the table over and cleaned up the rough edges of the melamine with some sandpaper by hand. And with that, I can test it out and call this project done. This was a really simple project, and one that I knew I needed, but I didn't really have a plan going in. And if you have any ideas on what would make this Outfeed table even better, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. But all that being said, I absolutely love this Outfeed table. It does exactly what I wanted it to, and with every cut I make, I worry less about gravity and human error ruining the piece I'm working on. And I also feel a lot safer making larger cuts. Thanks so much for watching, and stay tuned for lots more coming soon here on One Way to Make.